You know how we begin these videos? So, not to disappoint, quick heads up. This isn't financial or tax advice. I'm just sharing lessons I learned and am learning. If money has ever felt like it's constantly one problem away from falling apart, this video is for you. Not because you're irresponsible, not because you don't plan, but because most people are living without a buffer, and life has a way of testing that over and over again. In the last video, we talked about the first budget that actually works, a simple one, a realistic one, a budget designed to reduce surprises instead of pretending they don't exist. Today, we're talking about the single thing that makes that budget feel stable instead of fragile, an emergency fund. And before you tune out because the phrase emergency fund sounds intimidating or overwhelming, I want to reframe it right away. An emergency fund is not about preparing for the apocalypse. It's about giving yourself breathing room. It's about turning financial emergencies into inconveniences. Most people think emergency funds are about big disasters, losing a job, major medical issues, huge life-altering events. And yes, those things happen. But that's not why most people feel stressed about money day to day. Most money stress comes from small emergencies, car repairs, medical co-pays, broken appliances, travel for family situations, a surprise bill that shows up at the wrong time, things that aren't rare, things that are almost guaranteed. Without an emergency fund, every one of those moments feels like a crisis. Not because the amount is massive, but because there's nowhere for the money to come from except panic, credit cards, or borrowing from the future. That's why emergency funds matter so much early on. Not because they make you wealthy, but because they make you calm. Let's talk about what happens when you don't have one. Something breaks. You check your account, you do the mental math, you shuffle things around, you tell yourself you'll figure it out later. Maybe you put it on a credit card. Maybe you skip something else you were supposed to pay. Maybe you dip into money that was meant for something important. And then the stress lingers. Not just about the money, but about what might happen next. Because now you're behind and you know it. An emergency fund interrupts that cycle. It doesn't solve everything. It doesn't make life predictable. But it gives you a cushion, and cushions change how you experience stress. One of the biggest mistakes people make with emergency funds is thinking they have to be fully funded before they count. They hear advice like 3 to 6 months of expenses and immediately shut down. That number feels impossible, so they do nothing. And doing nothing keeps them exposed. Here's the truth. An emergency fund starts working the moment you have any money set aside for emergencies, even a small one. A few $100s won't protect you from everything, but it will protect you from a lot more than zero. And psychologically, that matters more than most people realize. When you know there's a buffer, even a small one, you make better decisions. You're less reactive, you're less likely to panic spend or swipe a credit card just to make the problem go away. You give yourself time to think. So let's define what an emergency fund actually is, in simple terms. An emergency fund is money that exists for one purpose, to absorb financial shocks. It is not for planned expenses. It is not for vacations. It is not for gifts or upgrades or this was on sale. It is boring money with a very important job. That's why where you keep it matters. Emergency fund money needs to be accessible, but not too accessible. You want it close enough that you can use it when you need it, but far enough away that you don't casually dip into it. A separate savings account works well for most people, not because it earns a lot of interest, but because it creates separation. That separation is key. When emergency money sits in the same account as spending money, it slowly stops feeling special. It becomes available, and available money tends to get spent. Now let's talk about how much you actually need, because this is where people get stuck. The traditional advice of 3 to 6 months of expenses isn't wrong, but it's also not the starting point. It's a long-term goal. Your first emergency fund milestone should be small and specific, enough to cover the most common surprises in your life. For many people, that's somewhere between $500 and $1,000. That amount alone can handle most car repairs, basic medical costs, or sudden bills without blowing up your entire month. Once you hit that first milestone, something important happens. You stop feeling constantly on edge. Money stops feeling like it's one bad day away from disaster. And from that calmer place, you can keep building. This is also where emergency funds and budgets work together. Your budget gives your money direction. Your emergency fund gives your budget stability. Without an emergency fund, every surprise punches holes in your plan. With one, the plan bends instead of breaking. Let's talk about how to actually build one, because just save more is not a strategy. The key is to treat emergency fund contributions like a bill. Not something you do if you feel like it. Something that happens by default. This is where automation matters again. If you wait until the end of the month to see what's left, there usually won't be anything left. If you move even a small amount automatically, right after payday, the fund grows quietly in the background. The amount matters less than the consistency. $20 a week, $50 a paycheck. Whatever fits your situation without creating stress. The goal is progress, not speed. One thing that helps a lot here is naming the account. Savings is vague. Emergency fund is better. Something like next emergency or life happens is even better. When money has a clear job, you're less likely to misuse it. Now, let's address a common question. What counts as an emergency? This is important because if everything is an emergency, nothing is. An emergency is unexpected, necessary, and urgent. A broken car you need for work qualifies. A medical bill qualifies. A surprise trip for a family situation qualifies. A sale at your favorite store does not. A vacation you didn't plan for does not. A want that feels intense in the moment does not. This isn't about being strict. It's about being clear. Clarity removes guilt. When you know what the fund is for, using it feels responsible instead of shameful. Another mistake people make is immediately trying to refill the emergency fund aggressively after using it. That can backfire. If you drain the fund for a real emergency, the priority is stabilizing your monthly cash flow again, not punishing yourself. You rebuild gradually the same way you built it the first time. Emergency funds are not a one-time project. They're a permanent part of your financial system. You use them. You rebuild them. You adjust them as your life changes. This also ties directly into why motivation fails. Building an emergency fund by motivation alone rarely works. It works when it's part of a system, when it's automated, when it's boring, when it doesn't rely on you feeling inspired. That's why emergency funds are one of the clearest examples of structure beating motivation. No excitement, no hype, just steady protection. Quick pause here. If this series has been helping money feel less overwhelming and more manageable, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps this channel reach people who need practical guidance, not perfection. Now let's keep going. Another benefit of emergency funds that people don't talk about enough is how they change your relationship with debt. When you don't have a buffer, debt becomes the default emergency fund. Credit cards become the solution to every surprise. That keeps people stuck in cycles they can't escape. When you have an emergency fund, you break that pattern. You stop adding new debt while trying to pay off old debt. Progress finally starts sticking. This is also why I generally recommend building at least a small emergency fund before aggressively paying down debt. Not because debt isn't important, but because stability comes first. A plan that constantly gets interrupted won't succeed. So if you're sitting there thinking, I should be paying off debt faster instead of saving, remember this. An emergency fund protects your progress. It keeps you from sliding backward every time life happens. Let's zoom out for a moment. What we've built so far in this series is a foundation, awareness, visibility, systems instead of motivation, a simple budget, and now a buffer. None of these things are flashy. None of them make great social media brag posts, but together they create something powerful, financial breathing room. Breathing room is what allows you to think long-term. It's what allows you to make choices instead of reactions. It's what makes the next steps, debt payoff, investing, long-term goals, actually possible. If money has always felt chaotic to you, this is usually the turning point. Not when you make more money, not when you find a perfect strategy, but when you're no longer constantly bracing for impact. So here's your action step from this video. Open a separate savings account if you don't already have one. Name it something specific. Set up an automatic transfer, even if it's small. And decide what your first emergency fund milestone is. Not forever, just first. Once you hit that number, stop and notice how different money feels. That feeling is what you're building toward. In the next video, we're going to talk about debt, not in a shame-based way and not with extreme rules. We'll talk about how to approach debt once you have stability and how to make progress without burning out or feeling deprived. But for now, remember this. An emergency fund doesn't make you rich. It makes you resilient. And resilience is what keeps everything else from falling apart. Bonus tip before you go. If saving feels impossible, start by redirecting money instead of finding new money. One subscription cancellation or one small spending tweak can fully fund a starter emergency fund faster than you think. That's it for this one. See you in the next video.